We today have a special presentation for 9/11, and as we called it, the Towers of Worship, or Towers of Worship. And after I will make a short introduction, I'll let Father Roy present his picture that is actually the theme of today's talk. My own experience about 9/11 and the religious experience that I'll share, and then my colleagues, of course, Father Roy Tvrdik and Dr. Don Russo, will share how we were transformed by the event of 9/11. And I'll share it after Father Roy, but I can tell you that for me, definitely as someone who didn't grow up in the United States and came after the Army service in Israel, my mindset was totally different than my colleagues that I've worked with. They were really not aware almost of, they were aware that there's terrorism in the world, but they didn't, I think, viscerally understand it. And I think 9/11 shifted that paradigm for many Americans. And I remember before that, when my friends would visit me in Israel from the United States, and they would say, you know, it's very weird that every place you go, you have to, you know, people check your bag, and you have to show ID and so forth. And then, you know, a few years later, we're kind of in a similar situation. So it was definitely a day that changed the mindset in many ways. And we'll each share today how our religious journeys and experiences were affected by it.
I have my own mic here. So good afternoon, everyone. We just had another little tragedy, not quite a big tragedy, but this picture, I don't know if people are going to be able to see it, but maybe we can just add it to the Zoom or whatever we can do here. I took this picture as a senior in high school and doing a project for my photography class, and I was very enamored at this point in my life for New York City. So I got on the train, went to Penn Station, took a subway downtown, and literally came out of the subway. And the first thing I saw as I looked up was this shot. It's a particular angle with the Trade Center and Trinity Church, kind of juxtaposed here. And I was so impressed by, wow, the old and the new, the dark and the light, the secular and the religious. And as I took the picture, I just wow, there's a shot, boom, I took the picture. It ended up winning an award for Suffolk County, you know, high school kid photography class. And it was displayed, I think, in Riverhead, and for a couple of weeks. And I did receive this picture back after it was done. And I put it in my box, and off I went to college. And never thought about it too much after that. And one day, I was at St. John's University. I did my undergraduate at St. John's in Queens. And never, ever did I walk into the magazine section of the library. I was always too busy looking at theology books and history books and whatever else I was reading. And but this one day I did have some free time, and I thought, let me go in the magazine section. Let me go in there. Literally picked up the first magazine. I am inspired and love photography, so I picked up an issue of Photography magazine, flipped a few pages, and there was my picture. This picture. But it was not credited to me. Somebody must have seen it at the, you know, wherever it was displayed, and thought, well, there's a cool picture. I have to go find the spot where that was taken. And took the picture and made it something, it made it to Photography magazine. So I never got the credit for it, but I've always loved the picture. Then I went on retreat, and actually why this is probably so important, I was having at this point a religious renewal. So I'm very sensitive to religious things. I saw this church, and then I saw the Trade Center. Now, being a native New Yorker and a Staten Islander by birth, I watched the Trade Center be built. So all those years in the early 70s, late 60s, 70s, so I watched them be built, and they were always just a part of my life. I literally watched them, and I just took such note. When you come on the ferry from Staten Island, obviously so dominant. And I was always kind of thinking, wow, they really stick out. More, like if I was gonna design it, I would have made them more, I guess, that would be to the east, and put them in the middle, but they stuck up on the left side of the skyline. So I loved them. I went up 100 times. And as time went by, I became the tour guide for the Montfort missionaries when they would come from Europe, any priest. I'd put them in the car and off we'd go. I was really good at navigating, and take them to the top. So I've been there 100 times. And the last time then, I remember, was in late August, and another friend was visiting from Italy, and we went at night, and we finished our journey. We were up on the roof, and beautiful summer evening, so we got the nice view. And Father Mario was going down the escalator, and he said, Roy, do I need to keep the ticket to go out? I said, no, you can throw it out, you can throw it. He says, but no, you know what, maybe keep it. It'll be a good souvenir someday. So I think it was the 28th of August or something like this. And of course, never knowing what was about to happen. And as we parked across near the Deutsche Bank, we got there at 11 o'clock, so it was very late at night. I knew it would be easy to park and all the rest. So we just walked right in, and up and down we went. And as we left, we were the last ones to leave up at the upper deck, and we came down the escalator, and we walked back to the car, and I said, Mario, come here. This is very interesting corner of the building, because this is firma terra. This is the real earth here. And the corner of the building, I don't know, I think it was the South Tower, I guess it would be, was right here. Whereas all the other parts of the building pretty much had different levels of whatever, roads and plazas and whatever. So here, though, the building actually met the earth. So we were on the real ground of the place. So we looked up. I said, look at this view. I mean, look at this, straight up, And he goes, oh my God, it looks like it's gonna fall over. And I said, oh. And I put my hands on the building, and I said, God forbid that it ever falls over. That was my prayer. God forbid it should ever fall over. Wow. Of course, a few days later, we were able to watch. I was down in, doing a mission down in South Carolina for the week, so I was returning to begin teaching theology at St. John's University. So full circle, the alma mater. I go back to my alma mater. I missed the first week of class because I was at the mission. It was already pre-scheduled, but I took the job teaching theology to freshmen. And the theme was Discover New York from your perspective. So the history professors did the history of New York, the English professors did the literature of New York, theology professors, priests did religion in New York. And I was very excited to start the program. I had books, I had all kinds of theories, and I was going to do the religions of New York, a survey course. Just how nice that'll be great. So I was going to teach a little bit of all the religions in New York. When I entered the classroom that morning, literally you could see the smoke still coming up from the towers. And I looked at the class, and it was 60 kids, full room. Every kid, every nationality, every religion under the sun was in that classroom. I had no idea St. John's had become that diverse. When I was there, it was like 80% Catholic and 20% everybody else. Now it was almost 20% Catholic and 80% everybody else. So I had girls with burqas, I had Jews, I had all kinds of Christians, I had atheists, I had Sikhs, I had Jains, I had Hindus, I had everybody. And then to walk into the classroom, see who my students are, and then to wrap my head around, I'm going to teach religion in New York. And the kids were white knuckles in the whole classroom. Didn't know what to say. How am I going to begin this class? What are we going to do? So just prayed a lot. Prayed a lot. Okay, Lord, give me wisdom. Let me figure this out. And but I began to really then begin a journey that I hadn't taken, to really understand Islam. I mean, I got it in the seminary, just a little bit of a treatment, not so much. Didn't know any of the history. It's a tough history for this. And what I've come to know now is this is not something that happened at 9/11. This is a 1,400-year history that goes all the way back to the 600s. And it's been a tragic history in humanity. So the struggle between Christians and Muslims, and then Muslims and Christians and Jews. And so here we are today to remember what happened and to try to put the pieces together. I am of the belief that there is one revelation, there's one God who has revealed through Christianity, through Judaism, and then into Christianity, and then Islam goes its way. But to really understand and remember and to see that whole history, that it's all connected. It's not just random events that have no connection to anything that preceded, and certainly about anything that's going to come in the future. So I learned for myself, as an American, as a Catholic American, I hadn't a clue about the historical nature of all this situation. So I began a whole journey of self-study. Whoa, what happened here? Where did these people come from? Where are we? Why did this, what's taking place? Beyond what the media will tell you, blah, blah, blah. There's big stories that are under this particular story. So I've spent the last now 21 years, pondering and learning and trying to put these pieces together and to remember. We have to remember, and one thing I've learned from Rabbi Gadi, Jews and Eastern people remember. As I've learned about Orthodoxy, Greek Orthodoxy, Russian Orthodoxy, these people remember. And in the West, in Europe, North America, we forget a lot. We don't know what happened and where we are. So if you don't know where you are, where you were, you don't know where you are and where you're going. It's absolutely essential. So to remember, 9/11 is an important thing. That be part of our understanding of this day. Just heard another little thing, just another podcast this morning, and saying that, wow, a lot of the kids don't remember. And I do remember being a little kid, maybe 7, and some of my elders, old aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles, of course, were in World War II. So in 1965, World War II was 21 years before. And I remember thinking, wow, World War II, all that happened? I don't understand it. I don't know. It was such a big thing they were talking about, but it was, way before I was born, 20 years ago. And this is what the kids are growing up today. Think of 9/11. It's like, it's prehistoric. It's so far away, but it's not. Of course, now I'm 65 years old, so 20 years is really nothing. So just appreciate time as we reflect, what's the true story, what happened in this tragedy, this tragic event. It's interesting now, this picture just got broken as Rabbi Gadi came in, and it fell to the floor, and it's broken now. So, all right, it's part of the tragedy of 9/11, for sure. It's just a tragedy. So, so that's all, a little reflection on finding, the story. It's a big story. It's not just 9/11. It goes way back into our history as Christians and Jews and Muslims, way back. And it's a sad story. But we do have to understand it in order to fix it, heal it. Don't just forget about it.
Well, we do remember, and not only do we remember, we do not forget. Just yesterday in the synagogue, we read about don't forget what the Amalekite did to you. Don't forget. Remember what they did to you. Don't forget. So yes, memory, of course, is who we are. So I'll share my experience from that day and kind of reflect out. So I'll start with the weekend before. It was a Friday, just before the Tuesday, and I was still deep in the corporate world, and I was working at 1221 Avenue of the Americas, and at a French bank, and I came early that day to work, but actually before that, the Friday before, my best friend came from Israel, and it was her first time in New York, in the United States, and I was working, as I said, with this company, and then we had a meeting at I believe it was 120 Broadway. Computer Associates was a big office. Their lobby was on the 50th floor, and it was overlooking the Twin Towers. It was amazing, beautiful view. So I asked my friend to pick her up and bring her to me so she can see the view before the meeting is over. So they came over, and the meeting went longer, and they waited for me outside at the 50th floor lobby of Computer Associates. The person who was at the lobby asked my friend where she came from, and she said, I came from Israel, and his first sentence to her was, wow, I don't know how you guys live with all the terrorism like that. So that was Friday. We went away for the weekend, and when we came back, she was going to go back to that building and take a picture of it. And she didn't feel good, and she was going to go on Tuesday morning. And so Tuesday morning, I'm at the office, and of course, it happened. And at that point, we didn't have cell phones, of course, or you couldn't really look at your computer over these things. So we ran to the trading floor when they had big screens. And we're standing in front of the screen, my friend and I from my department, and as we're watching it, we're all thinking at this point it was an accident. And as we're standing there, another plane came, the second plane came in. Now, this is where the two mindsets were different. My friend who grew up in the United States was standing next to me, and as I was seeing just the nose of the plane coming through the screen, I knew, a notion came to me, and I knew this was not an accident. This is already terrorism. When the plane hit, my friend, his immediate reaction was another accident. And this is when I knew that there are two worlds and maybe parallel universes that we live in. And that point for me was, even though I stayed for another almost 10 years in the corporate world, but this was for me the day that things have started to change. That coming to America and people who view America as a strong country many times, and that's why we call this program Towers of Worship, is because the Twin Towers became the symbol of America. It was almost, it almost replaced the Statue of Liberty. And somehow the concept of America became the financial world, the economical strength. Freedom was, I think, almost as an afterthought. If you, the notion was that if America would be economically strong, then it is a strong society. So it really became almost the symbol of what America stood for. And when we were watching it and they were collapsing, of course the human tragedy was beyond. And I remember when I saw the people jump off, that was the point when I realized how tragic this event was. But the collapse of that symbol, for me, from that day on, was an earth-shattering, but in a sense, it showed me too that I was also looking at the wrong place. The human tragedy is number one, but the symbolism that they were trying to attack, of course, that was they were doing. In retrospect, I don't know if if America is actually stronger or weaker after that. Looking at 21 years in retrospect, I personally believe that America today is stronger than it was 21 years ago. And the reason is because of the discussion that people have had with themselves, with the country, with what we stand for since. Another aspect of it was the rebuilding. The discussion of the rebuilding was fascinating. Because some people wanted to just rebuild the same structure. And actually, I have to say, I was one of them. Like, I know Robert De Niro was leading that movement to build as is. But I thought, in retrospect, when they built the Freedom Tower, the one tower, I thought they were right. And especially years later, when I met Father Roy, and he was talking about this story from the New Testament when the cedars.
No, that's
the
book of Isaiah.
The book of it is. I'm sorry, from the book of Isaiah. Yeah, can you elaborate when the sycamore?
The sycamores have fallen, but we will replant with cedar. And the bricks have fallen, but we will rebuild with stone. That was uttered by Tom Daschle, Senator Tom Daschle, on the floor of the Congress, I think the day or two after, as a beginning of a response, to build back better. It's actually the phrase it became kind of had the notoriety. So we're going to build back better. We're going to come back better and stronger. Okay, we'll see. Continue to
Which
your
is
thought.
a good thing to
Yeah,
build
sure.
better. It's always good to build better.
Yeah.
But what they were missing is that immediate response was, we'll build better. There was no time to reflect, to take the time and what we call to do tshuva, repentance. Maybe we didn't see something. Maybe what went wrong here? First, let's figure out first what went wrong, and then figure out how to rebuild. And that idea, I think, I found it the most fascinating because the way I felt moving from a culture of memory, a culture of redigestion all the time, rethinking of things, to a very fast-moving, instant, let's move on, let's get to the next thing, which I enjoyed for a while, definitely, and I still do. I like to be fast and do things and build, but you have to take the time to reflect and feel sometimes that you are inadequate. So that was missing, and I think America is stronger today because it takes more time to think. I see it from so you can say that maybe there's more division in the United States or people feel it on the street, but in the long run, it seemed that America is at least grappling with seriously with these conversations. So of course there are many more symbolisms that are associated with that. We'll get to it more when
I just want to
done.
finish maybe just, and then you can respond. But yeah, some of these ideas too are present in this picture, as I kind of related. You know, the towers, and if you're not too close, you can't see. But there's the main tower, and then the north tower is just a quiet little hint of it here, and you've got the church, and then a smaller another tower of it. So they both kind of have a public representation, the dominant representation, and then there's this other thing going on back here, kind of more the interior or the subtle representation. And I always found this curious that this building is white, and white is always, good, whatever, light, and, good, whatever, white. And this one is black, but this is the religion. This is the religious building, and it's dark. So there's kind of a conflict going on there. But it was years later that I noticed that if you keep looking at all this symbolism, or all the lines in the thing, that there's actually 4 arrows pointing up, pointing off the plane. And so what is interesting is that they do converge. You know, all these arrows in the building go this way, and this building is kind of leaning toward the other building. The church is leaning toward the secular. So we have this convergence somewhere way out here, and that's, the oneness of God. He created the spiritual world, and sometimes the spiritual world is dark. And he's made the secular world, the material world, and a lot of times it's bright, it's beautiful. So and so there's all these dichotomies going on here and the mystery of it all. So I find this picture so relevant, and it's certainly been a part of my entire life. And so I really have learned a lot from the towers and from the steeples. Two different lessons, but it is a wisdom thing. I always like to talk about wisdom. And, build back better. Oh, come on, let's just get rid of the dirt and we'll start with the new, and that's it. Oh, what a terrible thing. Unless we learn something more deeply than just that the buildings came down and we built something back nice. It's a way bigger symbol, a way bigger mystery. And of course, God's in the midst of it, for sure. And so what can we learn on the religious journey and the secular journey as these two worlds come? They will eventually unite, of course. So we pray for that wisdom. Any thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts all over the place. That morning, I had just finished my first class at high school teaching, and my next period happened to be my free period. And I had heard that something had happened at the Trade Center. So I went from first floor of school to the deck on the roof of the school, and there was one other teacher up there. And all of a sudden, I had a absolutely clear view of the Twin Towers. Nothing between. And all I could see was a cloud of smoke sitting there. not moving. It was surreal. And at that point, I couldn't even describe what my emotions were. I just stood there in awe of what was happening. Later on, after the buildings fell and so on and so forth, and we were watching all of this on television, and don't forget we had a school full of students, many of whose parents were working in the Trade Center. I don't think, maybe because I'm afraid of heights, but what affected me more than the buildings falling were the human beings jumping from the top of that building. I will never forget that as long as I live. We talk about juxtaposition. The juxtaposition of a building falling and human beings falling are something that I will, and I still am, trying to deal with both in my intellectual life and my spiritual life. The falling of things that don't last. What do we do with the evil that we're confronted with every day? I personally believe, well, let me go on with the high school story. I think the other thing that struck me more than anything else is a day or so later, when we talked about the casualties in the Twin Towers. Not one of our students lost a parent in that building, but the school lost 23 alumni. They were both working in the building and were first responders. And before I go on, I would just like to publicly say that our prayers go to all of those families who lost someone. Our prayers are for the dead also, and for the heroes. And for the world, that we learn something from the lessons that are being thrown at us every day for the last 21 years regarding the implications of this destruction. What I struggle with is what I think has become so prevalent in society right now is this either-or mentality. It's black versus white instead of black and white. I really believe that as long as we separate ourselves into winners and losers, the only winner will be evil. In reflecting upon what evil was perpetrated on that day, do we look to ideologies or do we look to people? And sometimes our ideas conflict with the reality. I know a favorite line of mine of Pope Francis is that reality is more important than ideas. And it seems to me that we have, in T.S. Eliot's words, humanity can't deal with too much reality. And I think what happens in our society is that we don't know how to deal with reality. And it's very uncomfortable for us to deal with the reality as it faces us. We see it in society today. Religions, especially elements of the Christian religion, will tell us, don't believe anything you see in front of you, okay? Because what you are seeing is not real. What is real is something that we can't see. It's in the world of the spiritual, right? It conflicts with doctrines. It conflicts with mentality. It conflicts with ideology. So when it comes, I did not find 9/11 as, for me, a transforming moment. It was one that, if I guess you could call it transforming, because at least it began to lead me on a way of trying to deal with the evil that has confronted us in reality. And I have thoughts on that. A great Jewish rabbi, Abraham Joshua Heschel, once said, and it rings true from reflections on 9/11 in 2001 right through to today. When it comes to these disasters, he said, few are guilty, but all are responsible. And until we begin to see ourselves not as individuals standing alone, but within a wider community, we have to come to grips with the responsibilities that we bear towards the tragedies that happen. And it's not just the tragedies of planes running into buildings, it's the tragedies of suffering, not just of the people in those buildings, but the suffering of what is going on in the world, the suffering of people we don't think about. It becomes very difficult, I think, for human beings to change. I mean, it's said we all want progress, but we don't want to change. And change itself can be very frightening. But I really believe that if there's going to be any sort of a movement, regardless of how hopeful and optimistically Gadi sees the strength, I'm hopeful, but I'm not optimistic until we begin to realize that in terms of what we are doing or trying to do, until we can get people talking together, dialoguing together, and realizing that good can come out of these communities that we're trying to form, it's going to be an uphill battle. I have a lot of other thoughts, but I will leave it at that in terms of my initial reactions to 9/11. I can't stop thinking about the humanity of kids that I taught, including the chef of Windows on the World, who happened to be in the building that day. Those faces will stay with me for the rest of my life. We've got to come to grips with the ideologies that rule this either or good guys, bad guys syndrome. Because good guys and bad guys, it depends on what side you're on. So both sides are good, both sides are bad, and who wins out but the evil that we're trying to respond to.
It's interesting that 9/11 is a number that is very significant in Judaism too, because it actually symbolizes the falling of our two temples. The 9th of Av, the 11th Jewish month, on the 9th day of the 11th month, but we write from right to left. So it really is 9/11. And that is really commemorates the saddest day in our history. But it also, as we say, in the future, just as the brokenness happened there, the rebuilding will happen. The rebuilding will happen at the same place. That's what we always say. The tikkun, the correction, will come from the same place of brokenness. So the reflection over it, it has, since the last destruction, it was 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years ago, but we still actually reflect on it. And we're thinking when we rebuild, and actually when Israel was rebuilt, it was the same kind of thought. What should we learn from Jewish history, from our destructions, to rebuild better? And I think that's why I am, I don't know, optimistic, hopeful, but I know from my own tradition that we never give up on hope. The national anthem of Israel is the hope, tikva, hatikva. So we can't give up on that. We say the brokenness, the pieces that are broken, just like when Moses came down the first time from the mountain, he broke the tablets because something was wrong. But God said to him, don't throw these pieces. You have to collect them. And then when he went back the second time and brought the second set of tablets, they were placed together with the broken tablets. So the brokenness for us is always part of the rebuilding. And I'll give one more example that actually last night I officiated at a wedding at the synagogue. And, at the end of a Jewish ceremony, the wedding ceremony, usually the groom steps on a glass and breaks a glass. And the broken glass is kept forever. It's usually kept with the prenuptial agreement called the ketubah. It's part of the life. And we teach about it that just before you seal the deal, know that with all the happiness that you're experiencing now during the wedding, there'll be brokenness in the relationship. And if the brokenness is going to be the end of the road for you, then there's no point because it's going to get there. Brokenness is another step in the relationship. So in a sense, what I've seen in my reflection of the 21 years, I think there has been maturity in America. America is a young culture. Of course, it's based on older cultures, but it really is, that brokenness, I think, was kind of went through, helped mature in many ways. And one last thing, did you want to say something?
Yeah, great. Good. Finish that.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Well, Gadi just gave a connection between the destruction of the two temples and then the destruction of the towers. I think it's important to just get the details here because many people don't know biblical history. So there were two temples in the Jewish history, Solomon's temple, and it was destroyed in 587 BC. After the time of Jesus, 40 years after Jesus, the second temple was destroyed by the Romans. So first by the Babylonians, then by the Romans, 500 years apart. But curiously, it was on the same day on the Jewish calendar. That's why it's kind of hidden for Christians especially. So that date is in Hebrew called Tish B'Av. Tish B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av. Av means 11 because it's the 11th month. So for 2,000 years, pious Jews commemorate that day, usually falls in August, and the Jewish calendar and the Christian calendar are off a little bit because like Passover and Easter, you might notice they get very close and they separate a little bit. Same thing for Christmas and Hanukkah, they float around a little bit. So it's not exact calendar. But in the Jewish calendar, it is amazing to me, because one of the first things we discussed way back, he asked me about Tish B'Av. I said, what's Tish B'Av? He says, well, it's the day that the two temples fell 500 years apart. And it was the same day on the Jewish calendar. And for 2,000 years now, Jews commemorate that day as a memorial, and they fast and they pray and they lament about the loss of two temples. So pious Jews, on that day, once the event happened, and then we referred to it then, we would refer to it as 9/11, 9/11. Well, that's exactly what Jews have been saying, Tish B'Av. Tish B'Av for 2,000 years, 9/11. That's how you call it. That's the exact translation from Hebrew into English, 9/11. Now, really, I was so shocked when I first understood that conversation. I was like, you're telling me, so that same name, now it's different dates, but the name is the same, 9/11. And so what happens with that reality of this destruction is, Jews have had to struggle with this for 2,000 years. Is our faith in a temple? Is our faith in God? Temples can come and go, obviously. And now these two buildings that represented so much to America, are we worshiping the building? That's where the title came in, a little bit of this worship of, okay, we're good, we're strong, we're this, we're competent, we're okay, and then have those buildings fall on a new date called 9/11. So I found that so significant that I say, wow, I don't even know what to do with it. It's just an amazing thing. But a lot of folks just don't know this connection, and that perhaps even there were two temples once upon a time, but their destruction and the destruction that happened on 9/11, there's some kind of mysterious connection. So I think it is about, destruction and rebuilding. But how do you rebuild? What are you going to rebuild? And what's the purpose of this new building? Have we learned? Have we grown? Have we gone more deeply into this mystery of God and the battle that is real between good and evil in this world? So as we struggle, we can't just say, okay, we're the good guys, they were the bad guys. Well, it's a little more complicated.
The interesting thing about also, it took place during the time of repentance in the Jewish calendar. So a lot of Jews who worked in those towers were not there early that morning because they were praying in synagogue. It was the time of repentance before the high holidays. It was just a few days. So the whole thing is amazing. I just want to complete my thought from before. So the towers of worship, for me, as a kind of a aspiring architect at one point, was a lot of fascination with buildings, and I learned through that, it was a process of maturity for me too, that, buildings are just buildings. The bricks and mortar, they're not what we are. They only are there for the purpose of the community and the people. And when the community is not strong, the building is just a shell. And it takes time, but when they fell, it was something mentally that fell for me too. And it did start my way to understanding that I want to work with people and for people. And the last thing that kind of pushed me over the edge that day was, not a good terminology, but mentally and spiritually, was actually after the fact. When I came back to my desk, it was about 2-3 hours later, as we were still watching the towers fall and everything, and we still had an office down on Wall Street. And people were going back and forth, and the people who were at the Financial Square were still seeing the plane. They saw the planes go right outside their window. But when I went back to my desk, I was expecting either people wouldn't be there or would do something that is related to helping other people. And a lot of people were still at their desk doing what they were doing. They just kept working. That moment for me was even more shocking than the falling of the building. As a Jew that understands the history and the Holocaust and when people are quiet, it is a destruction in its own. And for me, that moment was the deciding moment that it took me, again, another almost 10 years. But something cracked. And I thought to myself, if this thing happened and they're still working, are they robots? Are these people? Or the people that I want to work with? Is this the environment and the mindset that I want to be with? If something happens to me tomorrow, I'm not going to be there tomorrow. Who cares then? Then why should I spend all my time and energy, which was a lot, for this, in this? And the shift started, and eventually, of course, I went to rabbinical school, and I'm not sorry. And that feeling that I felt then, that moment, I keep feeling it all the time, because my job now as a congregational rabbi is way, as much as it was hard in the corporate world and competitive, this is harder. Way, way harder. But I know that I'm working for my people. I'm working for people that care about me too. And that we are building something together. And if I weren't there tomorrow, no, there would be a loss. And that really is where my heart is. And it started in September 11, 2001.
Yeah, in fact, what Gadi just said about those people who just kept on working, it kind of reinforces Eliot's comment, humanity can't deal with too much reality. I think when people are struck with reality, there is so much involved in having to, first of all, to understand it and then respond to it. And that's another word that I think is very important. When we're dealing with reality, especially if we see in that reality evil, we have to understand that we will never, ever defeat or conquer or get rid of evil. All we can do, in my understanding of the Christian message, is that we can respond in a Christ-like way to the situation, to that evil. It's not a problem to be solved. It's a reality that must be responded to. It's interesting that Mother Teresa, she never tried in all of her work to convert anyone to Catholicism. She always said that our job is not to talk about Jesus, but to be Jesus. And it seems to me that that is the way we respond as Christians, anyway, seeing the world and interpreting the world through the risen Christ. We talk about the word salvation, all right? What is it that was so impactful about the crucifixion, about Jesus on the cross, And I think this is a lesson for us to learn in the midst of all of this craziness going on. That Jesus took upon himself the toxicity of sin, but he never gave it back in kind. We have a tendency that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Something happens to me, I've got to give it back. And to me, part of the great moment of salvation and the lesson to be learned is that Jesus took on that toxicity, but he never turned it around and gave it back. All right? And I think that this is what we have to be called to. I forget the politician who once said, all politics is local. I think that that's true with regard to these major problems. Very often what happens is we look at the world and we say to ourselves, what can I do to change this? And I go back to that phrase, all politics is local. I believe all matters of church are local. And unless we on local level can start dealing with this and talking with one another and being positive in responding to the problems that face the community, that's where the change is going to come. Interestingly enough, it's not going to happen globally. In the long run, it's going to happen locally. And that's what we're attempting here in these dialogues that we're having. 9/11 is just, as Gadi said, the buildings were a symbol. What is the new building that we're trying to build? All right? Is it so corruptible? It may be new, it may look great, it may have all the new conveniences, but is it one that is still going to ultimately crumble? What really is the structure that we have to build that is going to last?
So I actually thought about this for many years, and I think the blueprint that it has to be developed for buildings have to match the community first. What are the needs of the community? What community do we want to build, and then build the building around that? Not just have a building which is nice and modern. But yeah, I think that's the shift. In terms of good and evil, yes, evil separates. Evil is cold. It's death. It's separation. Coming together is warmth, community, life, fire. Warmth. That really is the key, and it has to be local because you have to feel the camaraderie and the simpatico with people. Yeah.
I think just apropos of what Gadi was saying, I had quoted Abraham Heschel before, and part of that statement that he made, where he said, few are guilty, but all are responsible. He said, we have to form a community not indifferent to suffering, impatient with cruelty and falsehood, and continually concerned for God and every human being. So what Heschel's vision is, in terms of these great tragedies, is that is the type of a community that we're called on to build. We can't build a community that is indifferent to suffering and to what's going on. And until we begin to understand that these people are not other, they are part of us, we're still going to struggle.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Well, just I think the remark, God is God, and it all works out in the end. In the end, there will be this great reconciliation. And I think that's what I, discovered in my little picture here, that the secular and the sacred, the dark and the light, eventually will be united and made one and whole in God and eternal in God. Amen.
Thank you. I would just conclude with one thought that those what we title it towers of worship, I feel the same way about the synagogue or church or house of worship. It's the same thing. The building is a shell. So it's not just that we worshipped the towers and as the financial center, but it really World Trade Center, but it was any building that it doesn't have that core community in it is destined to fall.
If I could just have the last word, just want to build on what Father Roy said. God is God, and I think that leads to the hope that we have. But I also believe that if we are created in the image and likeness of God, the first thing God does in the Bible is to create. And if we are in that image and likeness, we are also called upon with God to be co-creators of what's going to happen in the future. That's where our hope lies.
Amen. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and those online.